The periscope glass fogged. Ray wiped it. 12 German tanks were still there. "Eddie, radio, now!" Static burst through the headset, then silence. "I'm trying. Try harder." December 16th, 1944. 06 on 12 hours. Ray had been watching this empty road for 4 hours. Now 12 Panzers were moving toward Bastogne, and his radio was dead. "What do we have?" Flares signal flags. Below him, Eddie Kowalski yanked cables, twisted dials, slammed the radio casing with his fist. Nothing. This thing is completely dark. Ray pressed back to the scope. Lead vehicle Tiger 1, massive 88mm gun that could kill them from a kilometer away. Behind it, Panzer IVs, Panther's half-tracks fuel trucks, all moving 15 kilometers per hour, all heading northwest, all heading toward the only road that fed the 101st Airborne. Distance: 820 meters. That's perfect range for... I know. Ray's hands were shaking, not from the cold, from what he was thinking. "Eddie, how many men you think are at Noville right now?" Silence. "How many?" "I don't know. Maybe 100. "Why?" "Because those tanks reach there in 22 minutes. Then they cut the supply line. Then 10,000 men at Bastogne starved to death." Eddie climbed into the turret. His face was pale. "Ray, we have orders." "I know what our orders are. Observe only. No engagement without authorization." "I know." "So what are you thinking?" Ray traversed the turret. The electric motor hummed. The crosshairs settled on the third vehicle, a Panzer IV moving with absolute confidence. No scouts ahead. No flanking security. Just a column that thought this road was safe. "I'm thinking nobody else can see them. I'm thinking by the time the radio works, it'll be too late. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong. They'll court-martial you, if you survive." "Probably." Eddie stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yeah. This is insane." "I know." Eddie grabbed a round from the ready rack. Checked it. His hands were shaking too. "If we do this, if we fire, we've got maybe 90 seconds before every German gun in 5 kilometers ranges us and blows us apart. 80 seconds if they're fast. 3 shots. That's all we get. Then I better make them count." Ray kept his eye on the scope. The column kept moving, steady, mechanical. 50 meters between each vehicle, like beads on a string. His mind calculated automatically. Always had. His father fixed tractors in Kansas, taught Ray to see angles, leverage, force. His mother taught math, taught him patterns. Everything moves in patterns, Raymond. Learn the pattern, predict the outcome. He'd learned patterns in Normandy. German tanks always hull down behind cover. German infantry always clear rooms from the left. German artillery always fire a ranging shot first. St. Lo, July 44. His best friend Martinez burned alive in a Stuart tank because he didn't see the pattern. The 88 always covered the intersection. Always fired at the second vehicle, never the first. Ray saw patterns now. The Tiger was the fist. The Panthers were muscle. The Panzer IVs were support. The half-tracks carried infantry. The fuel trucks kept everything moving. It was a structure. Structures had weak points. "Eddie, listen. If I hit the lead tank, what happens?" "Column stops. They reverse. They disperse." "Right. But if I hit the third vehicle," Eddie's eyes widened. "You block the road. Everything stacks up. Lead elements can't reverse. Trailing elements can't advance. And in that confusion, we kill them all." "That's the idea." The Panzer IV rolled into position. Side armor exposed. No cover. Perfect. "Ray." Eddie's voice was quiet. "You remember that paratrooper kid we met in Luxembourg? The one with the German cap?" "Yeah. Couldn't have been more than 17. He told us, 'We're ghosts, man. We jump in Ray's hell, disappear.' So I keep thinking about him, wondering if he's at Noville right now, sitting in some basement with a rifle and maybe 3 magazines, waiting for supplies." Ray's finger touched the trigger. Yeah, me too. If those tanks get through, they don't get through. Eddie loaded the round, slammed the breech closed. The sound echoed like a jail cell door. Okay, but for the record, you're insane. Noted. Ray adjusted the elevation wheel. Range 820 meters. Target speed 15 kph. Side armor 50 millimeters. Penetrable at this angle and distance. The crosshairs settled just behind the turret ring, where the fuel tanks sat, where a penetrating shot would turn metal into fire. After I fire, you've got 15 seconds to reload. I can do 12. Good, because I need 3 shots in 90 seconds. What are the targets? 3rd Vehicle Panzer IV, 6th Vehicle Troop Carrier, 8th Vehicle Fuel Truck. The fuel truck, Ray, that'll make them think they're under artillery attack. That's the point. That's insane. We've established that. The Tiger was 600 meters away now, pulling ahead. The Panzer IV passed a snow-covered log. Ray's breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. He thought about Captain Morrison 3 days ago. Your job is to watch and report, not to play hero. You fire, you're dead before you reload. Morrison was right. Tactically sound. But Morrison had working radios. Morrison had time. Ray had neither. What if I'm wrong, Eddie? What if those tanks aren't going to Noville? Then where are they going? I don't know. Ray, look at that formation. Look at their speed. They know where they're going. But what if... Stop. You see patterns nobody else sees. You've been right every time. Trust yourself. Ray's chest tightened. His finger rested on the trigger. Everything moves in patterns. Martinez burning. The paratrooper kid in the German cap. 10,000 men at Bastogne, waiting for supplies that would never come. The Panzer IV rolled into the kill zone. You ready? Ready. If I get hit, you drive. Don't stop. Don't look back. Ray, promise me. I promise. Ray pressed his eye tight against the sight. The Panzer IV filled the scope broadside side armor, clean, moving, steady. His father's voice, measure twice, cut once. No time to measure twice. This is for the ghosts. He fired. The gun bellowed. The blast slammed Ray's shoulder against the turret wall. His ears rang high-pitched whine that drowned everything. Cordite smoke filled the cabin, choking, burning his throat. Through the scope, the round struck exactly where he'd aimed. Behind the turret, fuel tanks. For half a second, nothing. Then the Panzer IV exploded, orange fire mushrooming upward, black smoke pouring out. Hit reload. Eddie was already moving. Breech open, hot casing clattered on the floor, smoking. New round. Slam. The turret shook. Up. The column was reacting. The Tiger started reversing. Panthers behind the burning wreck tried to maneuver off the road, but the road was narrow. Snow embankments on both sides. No room. They were trapped. Ray traversed left. 6th Vehicle half-track packed with infantry. 700 meters. Firing. The gun roared. Ray's shoulder screamed. The half-track vanished in fire and shrapnel. Bodies flew. Germans scattered into the snow, screaming, looking for cover that didn't exist. Reload. Reloading. 45 seconds elapsed. 45 seconds to live. The cabin was an oven now, despite the cold outside. Sweat poured down Ray's face. His hands burned where they touched hot metal. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning propellant. Ray traversed right. 8th Vehicle Fuel Truck. It was trying to reverse, but wreckage blocked it. Target firing. The gun kicked. The shell screamed downrange. The fuel truck didn't just explode, it erupted. A fireball 30 meters high. The blast flipped the Panzer IV behind it. Burning fuel spread across the snow like liquid fire, turning the forest road into an inferno. That's 3. We need to go now. But Ray stayed at the scope, watching. The Tiger was trapped, couldn't reverse, couldn't advance. Panthers were boxed in by wreckage and fire. German infantry were running blindly into the trees. Smoke poured across the entire column. They thought they'd been hit by an artillery battery. A whole battery. Not one tank destroyer, not two soldiers. "Ray, we're sitting ducks, move!" Ray pulled back from the periscope. His whole body was shaking. His ears still rang. His shoulder throbbed where the gun had kicked it 3 times. "Eddie, start the engine. Secondary position, now." The diesel coughed, roared. The Wolverine lurched backward. As they moved, Ray kept watching through the scope. 7 vehicles destroyed or burning. The rest trapped. No threat to Noville. No threat to Bastogne. 1 gunner. 3 shots. 90 seconds. The M10 disappeared into the tree line. Behind them, flames climbed into the gray sky. Ray slumped against the turret wall. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The cabin smelled like burnt metal and cordite and diesel. His shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a sledgehammer. "Ray?" Eddie's voice cracked over the intercom. "What happens when they find out what we did?" Ray stared at the smoke rising through the trees. Somewhere down that road, 100 paratroopers were still alive. Still breathing. Still waiting for supplies that would now reach them. "I don't know." Was it worth it? Ray closed his eyes, saw the burning panzers, heard the screams, smelled the death. "Ask me after the court-martial." But somewhere in his chest, past the fear, past the doubt, something settled. Something quiet and certain. He'd seen the pattern. He'd made the choice. He'd broken every rule. And Noville still stood. The Wolverine rolled deeper into the forest engine, growling tracks crunching through snow. Ray sat in the turret shoulder, aching hands, shaking ears ringing. Behind them the German column burned. Ahead the radio crackled, still dead. No orders. No authorization. No permission. Just the math. Just the angles. Just the choice between following rules and saving lives. Ray had chosen. Now he'd live with it. Or die with it. Either way, those 12 tanks weren't reaching Bastogne. That was enough. The radio crackled to life at 0823 hours. Baker 2-3. This is Baker 6. Report status. Over. Ray grabbed the handset. His hand was still shaking. Baker 6, this is 2-3. We engaged enemy armor. 12 vehicles. 7 confirmed destroyed. Over. Silence. Long enough that Ray thought the connection had died again. Then, say again, 2-3. Did you say you engaged? Affirmative. Enemy column was moving on Noville. Radio was down. No time to request authorization. I made the call. Another pause. Ray could hear voices in the background. Muffled. Urgent. 2-3 hold position. Command is en route. Do not repeat. Do not move from your current location. Acknowledge. Ray's stomach dropped. Acknowledged. Holding position. The radio went dead. Eddie looked up from the driver's compartment. That didn't sound good. No, it didn't. They sat in silence. The engine ticked as it cooled. Outside, snow had started falling again, light flakes drifting through the trees. Ray's shoulder throbbed where the gun had kicked him. His ears still rang. The smell of cordite still clung to his uniform. "Ray?" Eddie's voice was quiet. "What do you think they'll do?" "Honestly, I don't know. Court-martial, probably. Dishonorable discharge if we're lucky. Prison if we're not. For saving Noville. For firing without orders." Eddie climbed up into the turret, sat across from Ray. His face was gray with exhaustion. "That's insane. Those tanks would have cut the supply line. Bastogne would have fallen." "Maybe. But we didn't have authorization. We broke the chain of command. In the army, that's worse than losing a battle. So we did the right thing, and they're going to punish us for it." Ray didn't answer. He pulled out his field notebook, the small green canvas book every soldier carried. Started writing. Date. Time. Location. Weather conditions. Enemy composition. Rounds expended. Estimated casualties. What are you doing? Writing my report. If they're going to hang me, I want them to know exactly why I did it. Eddie watched him write for a moment. You're not sorry, are you? Ray paused, looked up. No, I'm not. Even if they court-martial you. Even then. Why? Ray set down the pencil, looked at Eddie directly. Because somewhere down that road, there's 100 men who are still alive. And tomorrow when the supply trucks roll through Noville, 10,000 more at Bastogne, get to eat, get to fight, get to maybe go home. That's worth whatever happens to me. Eddie nodded slowly. You know what? If they're going to hang you, they're hanging me too. I loaded those rounds. I didn't stop you. That makes me complicit. Eddie, you don't have to— Shut up, Ray. We're in this together. Before Ray could respond, they heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, heavy ones. Company's here, Eddie muttered. 2 jeeps and an M8 armored car rolled up to their position. Captain Morrison stepped out of the lead jeep, tall, thin, wire-rimmed glasses fogged from the cold. Behind him, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes from Battalion HQ. Behind Hayes, a Major Ray didn't recognize. This was bad. Morrison walked up to the Wolverine. His face was unreadable. Private Thompson, Private Kowalski, dismount. They climbed down, stood at attention in the snow. Morrison stared at them. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, sir. I fired on enemy armor without authorization. I take full responsibility. Private Kowalski was following my orders as crew leader. That's not what I'm asking. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? Ray's throat tightened. Sir, I understand I violated standing orders. I'm prepared to face the consequences. Morrison turned to Hayes. The lieutenant colonel was older, 50s gray hair, weathered face. He'd been at Kasserine Pass. Everyone knew it. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. Hayes stepped forward, looked at Ray. How many vehicles did you say you destroyed? 7 confirmed, sir. 5 more trapped by the wreckage. And you did this with 3 rounds? Yes, sir. In 90 seconds? Approximately, sir. Hayes walked past them to the Wolverine, examined the gun, the turret, the position they'd occupied. He pulled out binoculars, looked down toward the road where smoke still rose. He turned back to Morrison. Have we confirmed the enemy column? Yes, sir. Reconnaissance just reported back. 7 vehicles destroyed, multiple casualties. The survivors retreated east. The road to Noville is clear. Hayes looked at Ray again. Why did you fire without orders? Ray stood straight. Sir, my radio was inoperative. I had no way to request authorization. The enemy column was moving on Noville with no opposition. I calculated they would reach the crossroads in 22 minutes. At that point, they would cut the supply line to Bastogne. I determined that waiting for communications to be restored would result in the loss of the objective and significant American casualties. So you made a tactical decision on your own initiative? Yes, sir. Despite explicit orders to observe only? Yes, sir. Hayes was silent. The snow kept falling. Everyone stood waiting. Finally, Hayes spoke. Private Thompson, do you know what happens when soldiers start making their own tactical decisions without orders? Sir, I. Chaos. Complete chaos. The entire command structure breaks down. Battles are lost. Men die. That's why we have orders. That's why we have discipline. Because war isn't about individual heroics. It's about coordination. About everyone doing their assigned job. Ray's heart sank. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Do you? Sir, I knew the risks. I knew I was violating orders. But I saw the situation developing and I made a judgment call. If I was wrong, I'm prepared to accept the consequences. Hayes stepped closer, looked Ray directly in the eyes. What if you'd been wrong? What if those tanks weren't heading to Noville? What if they were decoys and you'd just revealed our position for nothing? Then I'd have made a mistake, sir. A mistake that could have cost lives. Yes, sir. Hayes turned to Morrison. Captain, what's your assessment of Private Thompson's actions? Morrison hesitated. Ray could see the conflict on his face. Sir, technically, he violated direct orders. The regulations are clear. Engagement requires authorization from battalion level or higher. That's not what I asked. I asked for your assessment. Morrison looked at Ray. Something shifted in his expression. Sir, Private Thompson destroyed 7 enemy vehicles and saved a critical supply line with 3 rounds and 0 friendly casualties. From a tactical standpoint, it was brilliant. From a disciplinary standpoint, it was insubordination. Which matters more, Captain? Morrison didn't answer. Hayes turned back to Ray. Private, why did you choose the 3rd vehicle as your first target? The question caught Ray off guard. Sir, why the 3rd vehicle? Why not the lead tank? Ray's mind shifted to tactical mode. Sir, the lead vehicle was a Tiger, experienced commander. If I'd hit him first, the column would have reversed and dispersed. By hitting the 3rd vehicle, I blocked the road, trapped the entire formation. And the second target? 6th vehicle, sir, a half-track carrying infantry, killed the dismounts before they could deploy, created panic. And the 3rd, 8th vehicle, sir, fuel truck. The explosion blocked the road completely and made them think they were under artillery attack. Hayes nodded slowly. You didn't just shoot at tanks, you shot at the structure that made them effective. Yes, sir. Where did you learn that? I didn't learn it anywhere, sir. I just saw the pattern. Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the major. Ray didn't recognize. Major Harkins, you're the intelligence officer. What do you make of this? The major stepped forward. He'd been taking notes the whole time. Sir, Private Thompson's engagement pattern is consistent with what we've been teaching at the Armored Warfare School at Fort Knox. Specifically the concept of disrupting enemy formations by targeting critical nodes rather than individual vehicles. We call it asymmetric targeting. Are you telling me this private just independently developed a tactical doctrine we're teaching officers? It appears so, sir. Hayes turned back to Ray. How old are you, Private? 22, sir. Education? High school, sir. 1 year of junior college before I enlisted. And you figured this out on your own? Ray didn't know how to answer that. Sir, my father was a mechanic. He taught me to see how things fit together. My mother taught math. I guess I just applied those principles to the tactical situation. Hayes was quiet again. Ray could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Eddie standing rigid beside him. Finally, Hayes spoke. Captain Morrison, I want a full after-action report. Include Private Thompson's diagrams, calculations, and tactical reasoning. Send it to Fort Sill and to the Armored Force Board. Morrison blinked. Sir, what about the disciplinary action? What disciplinary action? Sir, he fired without orders. Hayes turned to Morrison. His voice was cold. Captain, let me be very clear. Private Thompson saw an enemy force moving on an objective. His communications were down. He assessed the situation, calculated the risks, and executed a perfect engagement that destroyed 7 enemy vehicles and saved a critical supply line. That's not insubordination. That's initiative. That's exactly what we need more of. But, sir, the regulations. The regulations exist to prevent soldiers from doing stupid things. Private Thompson didn't do something stupid. He did something brilliant. And if we court-martial him for it, we're telling every soldier in this division that following orders is more important than winning the war. Is that the message you want to send, Captain? Morrison's face flushed. No, sir. Then write the report. Commendation, not court-martial. Ray couldn't breathe. Commendation. Hayes turned back to him. Private Thompson, you made the right call today, but understand this: you got lucky. The radio failure gave you the justification you needed. If you'd had working communications and still fired without orders, I'd be hanging you myself. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now get back to your position. Battalion is rotating you out tonight for equipment maintenance. Get some hot food, get some sleep, and for God's sake, get your radio fixed. Yes, sir. Hayes started walking back to his jeep. Then he paused, turned. Private Thompson, sir. What you did today, it saved lives. A lot of lives. Remember that when you're sitting in your position freezing your ass off wondering if any of this matters. It matters. He climbed into the jeep and drove away. Morrison stood there for a moment looking at Ray. Finally, he shook his head. You have no idea how lucky you are. I know, sir. Do you? Because I was about to have you arrested. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because Hayes overruled me. And you want to know why he did that, sir? Because yesterday his son was killed at Bastogne. Supply truck got hit by artillery because the roads were cut. So when he heard what you did, when he heard you kept those roads open, he saw you differently. You didn't just save a supply line, Private. You saved the life of every soldier those supplies reached, including the ones Hayes will never see again. Morrison walked to his jeep, paused. You broke the rules for the right reason. History will remember that. But don't ever do it again. He drove away. Ray stood in the snow. Eddie stood beside him. Did that just happen? Eddie's voice was shaky. I think so. We're not getting court-martialed. Apparently not. We're getting commended. Yeah. Eddie started laughing. Couldn't stop. We broke every rule in the book, and they're giving us medals. That's insane. Ray wasn't laughing. He was thinking about Hayes. About a father who lost his son because supplies didn't arrive in time. About how 3 shots from one gun had somehow changed the math of survival for thousands of men. Eddie, you know what's really insane? What? If the radio had been working, I would have called for orders. They would have said no, and those tanks would have reached Noville, and Hayes's son would still be dead along with 1,000 others. So what are you saying? Ray looked at the Wolverine, at the gun that had fired 3 times, at the empty brass casings still lying in the snow. I'm saying sometimes the system breaks down, and when it does, someone has to make a choice. And you don't know if it's the right choice until after. And even then, you might never know for sure. Eddie was quiet for a moment. You did the right thing, Ray. Did 7 German soldiers are dead because of me? Maybe more. They had families. They had mothers waiting for them to come home. They were trying to kill us. I know, but that doesn't make it easy. They climbed back into the Wolverine. The engine started. They drove slowly through the forest toward the rear area, toward hot food and sleep and whatever came next. Ray pulled out his notebook again. Kept writing. Not the tactical report now, something else. Something he needed to remember. December 16th, 1944. Today, I killed men to save men. The math says I made the right choice. 7 dead to save hundreds, maybe thousands. But math doesn't explain the weight. Math doesn't explain what it feels like to pull a trigger and watch metal turn to fire and know that inside that fire, someone's son is dying. Captain Morrison said I broke the rules for the right reason. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes said it was initiative. But what it really was, what it felt like in that moment, was being terrified and alone, and having to choose between doing what I was told and doing what I thought was right. I chose right. I think. I hope. But I'll never know for sure. He closed the notebook, looked out at the trees passing by. The snow was falling heavier now. Somewhere ahead, Bastogne still held. Somewhere ahead, supply trucks were rolling through Noville, carrying food and ammunition and hope. And somewhere in Kansas, his mother was probably sitting at the kitchen table, teaching kids how to calculate angles and patterns, never knowing that her lessons had just saved 1,000 lives. Ray leaned back against the turret wall, closed his eyes. The weight didn't go away. The doubt didn't disappear, but underneath it all, something settled, something quiet and true. He'd seen the pattern. He'd made the choice. He'd lived with the consequences. That was all anyone could do. The hot food turned out to be lukewarm beans and stale bread. Ray didn't care. He ate it sitting on an ammunition crate outside the battalion's supply tent, snow melting on his shoulders, the taste of cordite still in his mouth. Eddie sat beside him, eating in silence. Around them, other soldiers moved through the staging area, mechanics working on vehicles, medics sorting supplies, radiomen stringing new wire. Everyone looked exhausted. 3 weeks of the Ardennes offensive had ground them all down to something hollow. Thompson, Kowalski. They looked up. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb stood over them, their platoon sergeant, a career soldier who'd fought in North Africa and Sicily. He had a folder under his arm. "Sarge." Ray started to stand. "Sit down." Webb pulled up another crate, sat across from them. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at them both. Finally, "You know what you did today?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Do you—" "Because I've been in this army for 16 years and I've never seen anything like it. 3 shots, 7 kills, 0 friendly casualties. They're already talking about it at division." Ray set down his mess tin. "Sergeant, I just did what needed to be done." "No, you did what nobody else would have done. There's a difference." Webb opened the folder, pulled out a map, spread it on the crate between them. "You see this?" It was a tactical map of the Ardennes sector. Red marks showed German positions. Blue marks showed American lines. Webb pointed to a spot north of Noville. "This is where you were. And this," his finger traced a line northwest, "is where those Panzers were heading. Not just to Noville. Intelligence confirmed it. They were the lead element of a 3-battalion push. Tigers, Panthers infantry. Their objective was to cut the Bastogne corridor and link up with German forces at Houffalize." Ray's stomach tightened. 3 battalions. Yeah, you didn't just stop 12 tanks. You stopped an entire offensive. When you hit that column, the Germans thought they'd run into a prepared defensive position. Artillery, multiple tank destroyers, the works. So they called it off, pulled back, regrouped. By the time they figured out it was just 1 gun, we'd reinforced the line. Eddie stared at the map. 1 gun stopped 3 battalions. 1 gun and 2 soldiers who made a choice. Webb folded the map, put it back in the folder. "Command wants to know how you did it. They want to know your thought process, your targeting selection, your timing. Everything." "Sergeant, I just aimed at—" "I know what you aimed at. I read your report. What I want to know is why. Why did you pick the 3rd vehicle instead of the 1st? Ray thought about it. About the column moving through the forest. About the patterns he'd seen. Because the 1st vehicle was a Tiger. Heavy armor. Experienced crew. If I'd hit him, the commander would have reacted fast, reversed, dispersed. The whole column would have scattered. And the 3rd vehicle, Panzer IV, medium tank, lighter armor, easier kill. But more importantly," Ray paused, trying to find the words. "It was positioned where it would block the road, create a bottleneck, force everything to stack up." Webb nodded. "Controlled collapse. That's what you called it in your report." "Yes, Sergeant." "Where'd you learn that term?" "I didn't. I made it up. It just described what I was trying to do." Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thompson, how much schooling you have?" 1 year of junior college, Sergeant. Mathematics major before I enlisted." "And your father was a mechanic?" "Tractor repair. Small shop in Kansas." "So you grew up understanding how machines work, how systems fit together, how one failure cascades into another." "I guess so, Sergeant." "And you applied that understanding to a tactical situation, saw the German column not as individual tanks, but as a system, and you attack the system, not the parts. Ray hadn't thought about it that way. Maybe. Webb leaned forward. Listen to me, both of you. What you did today, it's being studied, right now. Fort Sill is analyzing your engagement. Armored Force Board wants your diagrams. Tank Destroyer Command is incorporating your tactics into their doctrine manual. Eddie's eyes widened. Our tactics? Your tactics. They're calling it asymmetric engagement theory. The idea that a smaller force can defeat a larger one by attacking critical nodes instead of engaging in direct combat. Webb pulled out another paper from the folder. This is a preliminary analysis from Division Intelligence. Want to know what it says? Ray nodded. It says that if every tank destroyer crew in the Ardennes had executed the same tactical pattern you did, we could have stopped the German offensive in 48 hours instead of 3 weeks. That's how significant your actions were. The weight of that hit Ray like a physical thing. He'd been thinking about 7 dead Germans, about court-martial, about whether he'd made the right choice. He hadn't been thinking about changing doctrine, about influencing an entire theater of operations. Sergeant, I didn't mean to. I know you didn't. That's what makes it important. You weren't trying to prove a theory. You weren't trying to make history. You were trying to save lives. And because of that, because you acted from necessity instead of glory, you stumbled onto something real, something that works. Webb stood up, looked down at them both. They're rotating you out tomorrow, sending you back to Fort Hood for 6 weeks. You're going to teach. Teach what? Everything you know. They're creating a new training program for tank destroyer crews. Advanced tactical engagement. You two are going to be the primary instructors. Ray felt his chest tighten. Sergeant, I'm not an instructor. I'm a gunner. You're both now. Webb handed him the folder. These are your orders. You leave at 0600 tomorrow. Pack your gear. Report to Battalion S3 for debriefing at 2000 hours tonight. Bring your field notes. Bring your diagrams. Bring everything. He started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. Thompson. Yes, Sergeant. You asked me once back at Normandy after Martinez died. You asked me how I lived with it. The killing, the decisions. Remember, Ray remembered. It was after St. Lo, after watching his friend burn. He'd been 22 years old and couldn't stop shaking, and Webb had found him sitting behind a half-track at 0300 crying. I remember, Sergeant. You know what I told you. You said it never gets easier. You just get better at carrying it. Webb nodded. Yeah, that's still true. But here's something else I didn't tell you then. The weight gets heavier every time. Every choice. Every trigger pull. Every man who dies because of you. It accumulates. And one day, you wake up and realize you're carrying more weight than you knew was possible, and you have 2 choices. You either let it crush you, or you find a way to make it mean something. How do I make it mean something? You teach others not to make the same mistakes you made. You share what you learned so fewer men have to learn it the hard way. You turn your pain into purpose. Webb's voice was quiet now. You killed 7 men today, Thompson. But if you teach 100 crews how to do what you did, you'll save thousands. That's how you balance the scale. That's how you live with it. He walked away. Ray sat there holding the folder. His hands were shaking again. Not from cold, from understanding. Eddie looked at him. You okay? No. Want to talk about it? No. Want to get drunk? Ray almost smiled. That's against regulations. So was shooting without orders. Didn't stop you then. They sat in silence. The snow kept falling. Around them, the war continued. Engines running orders, shouting men dying somewhere beyond the tree line. At 2000 hours, Ray reported to the S3 shop a converted barn lit by kerosene lamps and filled with maps. Captain Morrison was there. So was Major Harkins from Intelligence. And a captain Ray didn't recognize looked young, maybe 30, wearing an instructor badge from Fort Knox. Private Thompson. Morrison gestured to a table covered with papers. This is Captain William Rhodes. He's from the Armored Force School. He's going to ask you some questions. Rhodes shook Ray's hand. Relax, Private. You're not in trouble. I just want to understand how you think. They spent 3 hours going through everything. The initial sighting, the radio failure, the decision to engage, the target selection, the timing. Rhodes took notes, constantly asked detailed questions, made Ray draw diagrams over and over until they were perfect. This angle here. Rhodes pointed to Ray's sketch of the Panzer IV. You aimed behind the turret ring. Why? Fuel tanks are located there. Penetrating shot would ignite them, turn the kill into a fire that blocks the road. How did you know the fuel tanks were there? I didn't know for certain, but I'd studied German tank diagrams during training. Most Panzers have similar layouts. Fuel in the rear hull, ammunition in the turret, engine in the back. So you were making an educated guess? Yes, sir. And if you'd been wrong, Ray paused, then I would have wasted a shot, but the position was still good for a kill. Even if I'd hit the engine compartment or the crew space, the tank would have been disabled, still would have blocked the road. Rhodes nodded, wrote more notes. Tell me about the second shot, the half-track. Why that target? Infantry, sir. The half-track was carrying dismounts. If they'd deployed, they would have spread into the woods, set up anti-tank positions, made it harder to kill the remaining vehicles. So you were thinking multiple moves ahead? I guess so, sir. That's chess, Private, not warfare. Sir, warfare is chess. It's about seeing the whole board, understanding how pieces move, predicting what your opponent will do. Rhodes set down his pencil, looked at Ray directly. How old did you say you were? 22, sir. And you figured this out on your own? I just applied what I knew, sir. Mathematics, mechanics, patterns. Rhodes looked at Morrison. Captain, this soldier needs to be an officer candidate school. Ray's heart jumped. Sir, I'm serious. This level of tactical thinking, this ability to synthesize information and make split-second decisions, that's what we're trying to teach officers, and he's doing it naturally. Morrison nodded slowly. I'll recommend it in his evaluation. Don't recommend it. Mandate it. This war needs soldiers who can think like this. We're running out of time to find them. They kept questioning Ray until past midnight. By the time he walked out of the barn, his head was spinning. Officer Candidate School, Instructor, Doctrine Development. None of this was what he'd signed up for. He just wanted to be a gunner, do his job, survive the war, go home. Now everything was different. Eddie was waiting outside smoking a cigarette he'd traded from a British soldier. How'd it go? They want to send me to OCS. Eddie choked on the smoke. Officer school, you. Yeah. Jesus, Ray. You're going to be giving me orders someday. If I accept. What do you mean if that's a ticket out of this hell? Officers don't sit in frozen tank destroyers. They don't get shot at. They plan operations from heated command posts and drink coffee. Ray looked at him. You really believe that? Eddie was quiet. No, I guess not. They walked back toward their bivouac area, past rows of tents and vehicles, past medics carrying wounded on stretchers, past a chaplain saying prayers over 3 bodies covered with blankets. Eddie, can I ask you something? Yeah. When I gave the order to load, when I told you I was going to fire, you could have refused. You could have said no. You could have pulled rank, stopped me, called for help. Why didn't you? Eddie took a long drag on his cigarette. You know why. Tell me anyway. Because you were right. Because I'd seen what you could do. Because every time we'd been in combat, you'd made the right call. Martinez died because he didn't listen to you. Remember, you told him not to take that intersection. You said the 88 would be covering it. He went anyway. Ray remembered. Martinez had been eager. Wanted to be first into St. Lo. Wanted the glory. Ray had tried to stop him. And when we were at Normandy, Eddie continued, you told me to wait 3 seconds before moving across that field. Said the German machine gunner had a pattern. Fire, pause, fire. You counted it. I waited. The gunner fired right where I would have been if I'd moved early. I just saw the pattern. Yeah, you always do. So when you said you needed to fire when you said those tanks were going to Noville, I believed you. Because you'd been right every time before. And I figured if you were wrong this time, at least we'd go out trying to do something that mattered. They reached their tent, crawled inside, lay on their cots in the dark. Ray stared at the canvas ceiling. Eddie, you know what scares me. What if I'm only right because I've been lucky? What if the pattern I see isn't real? What if it's just randomness that I'm mistaking for order? Then you've been lucky a lot. That's what scares me. Luck runs out. Eddie rolled over on his cot. Ray, stop. You're not lucky. You're good. There's a difference. Luck is random. Skill is repeatable. And you've repeated the same performance over and over. That's not luck. That's you. Ray wanted to believe that. But part of him, the part that still saw 7 burning Panzers and heard screaming, couldn't. I keep thinking about them, Ray said quietly. The Germans in those tanks, they had families, mothers, maybe wives, maybe kids, and I killed them. They were trying to kill us. I know, but that doesn't make it easier. It's not supposed to be easy. That's how you know you're still human. They lay in silence. Outside, someone was playing harmonica, a slow, sad melody that Ray didn't recognize. The snow kept falling. The war kept grinding forward. At 600 the next morning, Ray and Eddie packed their gear, loaded into a deuce-and-a-half truck, rolled west toward the rear areas toward safety, toward Fort Hood and whatever came next. As they drove, Ray looked back at the Ardennes forest, at the smoke still rising from a dozen battles, at the men still fighting and dying among those frozen trees. He thought about Webb's words, "You turn your pain into purpose." He thought about the paratrooper kid in the German cap, about Hayes's son who died waiting for supplies, about Martinez burning in the Stuart tank. He thought about patterns and mathematics and his mother at the kitchen table teaching him that everything in the world could be understood if you just looked hard enough. And he understood something new, something he hadn't seen before. War wasn't chaos. War was pattern. And pattern could be taught. And if pattern could be taught, then fewer men had to die learning it the hard way. Fewer Martinezes. Fewer sons waiting for supplies that never came. The truck rolled through a checkpoint, passed into Allied territory. The sound of artillery faded behind them. Eddie looked at Ray. "You going to take that OCS slot?" Ray was quiet for a long time. Then, "Yeah, I think I am." "Why?" "Because Webb was right. I can't change what I did. Can't bring back those 7 Germans. Can't undo the choice I made. But I can make sure other soldiers have better choices. Can teach them to see the patterns. Can help them survive." "That's a heavy burden." "Yeah, but it's lighter than doing nothing." The truck kept rolling west. Behind them the Ardennes burned. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, a future waited where Ray's 3 shots would become doctrine, where his patterns would save thousands, where his choice to fire without orders would be studied in military academies for generations. But in that moment, sitting in the back of a truck with his best friend Ray, wasn't thinking about history. He was thinking about balance, about how you take weight and turn it into purpose, about how you live with the choices you make when there are no good options, only less terrible ones. The snow kept falling, the war kept moving, and Ray Thompson kept carrying forward one choice at a time, one pattern at a time, one life saved at a time, because that was all anyone could do in a world where the rules sometimes broke and someone had to decide what came next. Fort Hood, Texas, February 1945. Ray stood in front of 40 tank destroyer crews, chalk in hand diagram on the blackboard behind him. The Texas sun burned through the windows of the training hall, so different from the frozen Ardennes that sometimes Ray forgot where he was. "Target selection isn't about what you can kill," he said. "It's about what you need to kill to break the system." A hand went up. Corporal Jensen, Iowa farm kid, reminded Ray of himself 6 months ago. "Sir, what if you don't have time to analyze the system?" Ray wasn't a sir yet. OCS wouldn't start until April, but the trainees called him that anyway. "You always have time. Even if it's only 3 seconds. Your brain can process a lot in 3 seconds if you train it right." He drew another diagram. A convoy. Vehicles numbered 1 through 12. "Quiz time. You've got 1 shot. Radio's dead. No backup. Which vehicle do you hit?" "The lead tank," someone called out. "Why?" "Take out the leader, the rest stops." Ray shook his head. "Wrong. The rest reverses and disperses. You've revealed your position and accomplished nothing. Anyone else?" "The fuel truck at the rear," another voice said. "Better. Why?" "Cut their fuel supply." "Good thinking, but still wrong in this scenario. The fuel truck is 1,200 meters away and moving. That's a low percentage shot. You miss, you've wasted your round." "What else?" Silence. The trainees stared at the diagram. Ray tapped the third vehicle. "Here. Always here. Medium tank lighter armor positioned where wreckage will block the road. Hit this and you trap everything. Then you have time for follow-up shots." He'd given this lecture 17 times in the past month. Each time he saw the moment it clicked. When the trainees stopped seeing individual tanks and started seeing the pattern. "Sir," Jensen again, "how do you train your brain to see that in 3 seconds?" Ray set down the chalk. "You practice. Every time you see a convoy on the road, any convoy, even supply trucks, you ask yourself, which one would I hit? You make it automatic. Pattern recognition becomes instinct." After the lecture, Ray walked across the base to the officer candidate barracks. His OCS class started in 6 weeks. Until then, he was teaching during the day and studying at night. Tactics, logistics, leadership theory. All the things they said officers needed to know. Eddie met him outside the mess hall. "How'd it go?" "Same as yesterday. They get it by the end, but it takes time." "Ray, you've trained 400 crews in the past month. That's 400 guns that know how to think like you. You realize what that means." Ray did realize. Captain Rhodes had shown him the projections. If every trained crew executed asymmetric targeting with even 50% of Ray's efficiency, American tank destroyer effectiveness would increase by 300%. That translated to thousands of German vehicles destroyed. Thousands of American lives saved. But it also meant Ray's 3 shots in the Ardennes, his unauthorized decision, was now official doctrine. They'd put it in the field manual. FM 18-5, Tactical Employment of Tank Destroyers, revised February 1945. Section 4.3, Asymmetric Engagement Theory. Ray's name wasn't in the manual, but his thinking was. "Eddie, can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "Do you ever think about them? The Germans we killed?" Eddie was quiet for a moment. "Every day." "Does it get easier?" "No, but I'm learning to live with it. You?" Ray thought about that. About the weight Webb had talked about. About turning pain into purpose. "I don't know yet. Ask me in 10 years. They ate in silence. Around them, other soldiers talked about the war news. The Soviets were closing in on Berlin from the east. The Americans were crossing the Rhine from the west. Everyone said it would be over by summer. Ray hoped they were right. But part of him knew that even when the shooting stopped, the war wouldn't be over. Not for him. Not for anyone who'd pulled a trigger and watched someone die. After dinner, Ray walked to the base library. He'd been reading everything he could find about military theory, Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, Liddell Hart. Trying to understand if what he'd done in the Ardennes was genius or just luck with good timing. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, waved him over. "Private Thompson, this came for you." She handed him a letter. No return address. Postmark from Belgium. Ray opened it carefully. Private Thompson. You don't know me. My name is Lieutenant James Decker, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. I was at Nouville on December 16th when your action stopped the German column. I'm writing because I think you should know what your decision meant. We had 83 men at Nouville that morning. No tanks, no anti-tank guns heavier than bazookas. We'd been told to hold the crossroads until relieved, but we all knew if serious armor showed up, we were done. At 07:15 hours, we heard explosions to the southeast. Big ones. Then we saw smoke. Then German infantry came running through our lines, retreating panicked, talking about American artillery and ambush. We captured 12 of them. It wasn't until later that we found out it was just you. 1 gun. 3 shots. I don't know if you understand what that means. You saved 83 lives that day. Probably more, because if Nouville had fallen, the supply line to Bastogne would have been cut. My brother is with the 101st at Bastogne. He's alive because trucks got through on December 17th with medical supplies and ammunition. So I'm writing to say thank you, and to tell you that in our company, we tell the story of the gunner at Nouville. We don't know if it's true or legend, but we tell it anyway, about the soldier who broke the rules and saved everyone. I hope you make it home safe. Lieutenant James Decker. Ray read the letter 3 times. His hands were shaking. 83 men. He'd known he'd saved Nouville. He hadn't known the exact number. Hadn't known about Decker's brother. Hadn't known they were telling stories about him. He folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket next to his field notebook. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about numbers. 7 Germans dead. 83 Americans alive. 3 shots. 12 tanks. 1 decision. Mathematics said it was the right choice. 7 for 83 was good math. But math didn't explain what it felt like. Didn't explain the weight. At 0300 he gave up on sleep. Walked outside. The Texas night was warm, nothing like the Ardennes. He sat on the steps of the barracks and pulled out his notebook, started writing. The thing they don't teach you is that courage and doubt aren't opposites. They coexist. Every time I think about what I did, I'm simultaneously certain it was right and terrified it was wrong. Both feelings are true. Both feelings are real. Webb told me to turn pain into purpose. I'm trying. I've trained 400 crews. I've taught them to see patterns. I've given them tools to survive. But I can't teach them how to live with it afterward. Can't teach them how to carry the weight of killing to save. Maybe that's something everyone has to figure out on their own. He closed the notebook. Looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, Martinez was dead. Hayes's son was dead. 7 German tankers were dead. And Ray was alive, trying to figure out what that meant. Footsteps approached. Captain Rhodes sat down beside him. Can't sleep. No, sir. Me neither. Mind if I join you? It's your base, sir. Rhodes pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Ray. Ray shook his head. Rhodes lit his own, took a long drag. I read your letter from Lieutenant Decker. Ray looked at him. How did you... The librarian reports all mail to command. Security protocol. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. I just wanted to talk about it. There's nothing to talk about, sir. I disagree. Thompson, you know what the hardest part of command is? No, sir. Making decisions when you don't have enough information. When you're tired and scared and people are dying and you have to choose. And the choice you make, it'll save some people and kill others. And you'll never know if you made the right call. Ray understood that. Is that why you wanted me in OCS? Partly. But mostly because you've already proven you can make those decisions. Most officers, hell, most generals spend their whole careers avoiding hard choices, passing the decision up the chain, covering their ass with regulations. You didn't do that. You saw the situation, calculated the risk, and acted. That's leadership. Sir, I broke the rules. You broke the rules for the right reason. There's a difference. Regulations exist to guide decisions, not replace them. A good officer knows when to follow the rules and when to break them. You've already demonstrated that capability. Now we need to teach you everything else. Rhodes stood up. Get some sleep, Thompson. You've got another lecture at 0800, and stop second-guessing yourself. Doubt is healthy. Paralysis isn't. You made a choice. It saved lives. That's enough. He walked away. Ray sat there for a while longer. Then he went back inside, lay down on his bunk. This time sleep came. April 1945. Ray started officer candidate school. 12 weeks of intensive training tactics, logistics map reading, leadership exercises. He was one of 60 candidates, most of them older, most of them with more combat experience. But Ray had something they didn't. He'd made a decision that changed doctrine. That carried weight in the classroom. Instructors used his Ardennes engagement as a case study. Fellow candidates asked him questions. He became known as the gunner from Noville, even though most of them didn't know the full story. Eddie washed out after 3 weeks, failed the land navigation exam, went back to his original unit as a sergeant. Ray wrote him letters every week, but they felt inadequate. How do you maintain a friendship when one person is becoming an officer and the other isn't? The war in Europe ended on May 8th, VE Day. Everyone celebrated. Ray felt nothing, just relief that the killing was over, and guilt that he was in Texas instead of fighting. In June, Ray graduated OCS. Second Lieutenant Raymond Thompson. His mother and father drove from Kansas for the ceremony. His mother cried. His father shook his hand and said, "Proud of you, son." That was all. That was enough. They gave Ray orders report to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Artillery School, Advanced Tactical Training Division. He'd be teaching officers now, not enlisted men. Teaching them asymmetric engagement theory. Teaching them how to see patterns. Before he left Texas, Ray drove into town, found a small church, sat in the empty pews. He wasn't particularly religious, hadn't been to church since he was a kid, but he needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think. He thought about the 7 Germans, about Martinez, about Hayes's son, about Decker and his 83 men at Noville, about all the people who'd lived and died because of choices made by scared young men who didn't have enough information. He thought about his mother's words. Everything moves in patterns, and he realized she was wrong. Not everything moved in patterns. Some things were just chaos, random death and random survival. The shell that killed one soldier and missed another by inches. The convoy that took the wrong road and got ambushed. The radio man whose equipment failed at exactly the wrong moment. Pattern recognition helped. Training helped. Experience helped. But sometimes survival was just luck. The difference was what you did after, whether you turned luck into purpose or let it crush you. Ray stood up, walked out of the church, got in his car, and drove to Oklahoma. At Fort Sill, he taught for 6 months. Officers from every branch, armor, infantry, artillery. He showed them diagrams, walked them through scenarios, made them think about systems instead of targets. Some got it immediately, others never did. Ray learned to tell the difference in the first 10 minutes, the ones who saw patterns and the ones who just saw chaos. In November, a colonel from the War Department visited. Colonel Frank Matthews, Strategic Planning Division. He sat in on Ray's lecture, took notes, asked questions afterward. "Lieutenant Thompson, how would you apply asymmetric engagement theory to Pacific operations?" Ray hadn't thought about that. The war in Europe was over. The Pacific was different islands, jungles, naval combat. "Sir, I'm not sure it applies. Pacific warfare is more about logistics and amphibious assault than tank combat. Think broader. The theory isn't about tanks, it's about systems. Japanese defensive positions are systems. Supply lines are systems. Command structures are systems. If you can identify the critical nodes, the points where one failure cascades into total collapse, you can defeat a larger force with minimal resources. Ray understood. You're talking about strategic application, not just tactical. Exactly. We're planning the invasion of Japan. Casualty estimates are over 1 million Americans. But if we can identify and attack the right targets, not just military, but industrial, logistical, psychological, we might be able to force surrender without invasion. Sir, that sounds like what you did at Nouville, but on a national scale. Yes. Ray felt cold despite the Oklahoma heat. Sir, I killed 7 men to save 83. What you're describing would kill thousands. To save hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. The math is the same, Lieutenant, just bigger numbers. Matthews left. Ray sat in his office for an hour afterwards, staring at the wall. The math was the same, 7 for 83, thousands for millions. The principle didn't change with scale. But something felt wrong. At Nouville, Ray had been making a tactical decision in immediate combat. What Matthews was describing was strategic planning. Deliberate, calculated, cold. Ray pulled out his notebook, started writing. When does tactical necessity become strategic murder? When does asymmetric targeting become terror bombing? Where's the line? I don't know. I thought I understood the math. Now I'm not sure mathematics applies to this scale. He never finished that entry. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On August 9th, another on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. Ray heard the news in the officers' club. Everyone celebrated. The war was over. No invasion needed. American lives saved. Ray walked back to his quarters, sat on his bunk, thought about patterns and systems and critical nodes, thought about Matthews' words, like what you did at Nouville, but on a national scale. He thought about his 3 shots that killed 7 men and saved 83. He thought about 2 bombs that killed 200,000 and saved, 1 million more. The math was the same. The principle was the same. Attack the critical node. Collapse the system. Force surrender through precision rather than attrition. But it didn't feel the same. At Nouville, Ray had seen the enemy, had watched through his periscope as tanks rolled toward men he was trying to save. The killing had been immediate, personal, necessary. Hiroshima was none of those things. It was distant, abstract, deliberate. Ray didn't know if that made it wrong. Didn't know if saving 1 million lives justified killing 200,000. The mathematics said yes. The weight in his chest said maybe not. He pulled out Decker's letter. Read it again. You saved 83 lives that day. He'd saved them by killing 7. That was clear, direct, understandable. But if someone wrote a letter 50 years from now saying, "You saved 1 million lives in August 1945," would that be equally true? Would the mathematics balance? Would the weight ever settle? Ray didn't know. He folded the letter, put it away, lay down on his bunk. Outside, people were still celebrating. Victory, peace, the end of killing. Inside, Ray Thompson lay awake, thinking about patterns and mathematics, and the distance between a trigger pull and a button press, between 7 deaths and 200,000, between tactical necessity and strategic horror. He'd learned to see patterns everywhere. But some patterns, the ones that emerged at the scale of nations and generations, were too large to see clearly, too complex to understand, too heavy to carry without breaking. The war was over. The weight remained. And Ray was only beginning to understand that victory and peace didn't make it lighter. They just gave you more time to feel it. Ray left the Army in December 1945. Honorable discharge, 2nd Lieutenant. Combat Infantry Badge. Bronze Star for actions at Nouville. He packed his uniforms in a footlocker, shipped them home to Kansas, and tried to figure out who he was without the war. His father's repair shop needed help. Ray spent the first 6 months back working on tractors, the same work he'd done as a teenager. But everything felt different now. His hands remembered the tools. His mind remembered the patterns. But something had changed. He couldn't stop calculating angles. Every tractor that rolled into the shop, he'd see vectors and trajectories. Every convoy on the highway, he'd pick the third vehicle. Every problem his father handed him, he'd break down into systems and nodes and cascade failures. "You're different," his father said one evening, both of them covered in grease, working on a seized engine. "Yeah. War does that." "Did it do it to you?" His father had served in World War I, France, infantry. He never talked about it. Ray had asked once as a kid. His father had said, "Some things you don't talk about. You just carry them." Now his father set down his wrench, looked at Ray directly. "You want to know what I learned over there?" "Yeah." "That the world breaks you. War, peace doesn't matter. Life breaks everyone eventually. The question isn't whether you break, it's what you do after. Do you let it destroy you, or do you rebuild into something different?" What did you rebuild into? A mechanic, a father, a man who fixes things because he got tired of watching things stay broken. Ray understood that. "Is that why you never talk about it?" "No, I don't talk about it because talking doesn't change what happened. But fixing engines, that changes something. Every tractor I repair, someone's farm keeps running. Someone's family eats. That's rebuilding. That's purpose." They went back to work. The engine came apart piece by piece, problem identified, solution applied. By midnight, they had it running again. Ray wiped his hands on a rag. "Dad, I don't think I can stay here." His father nodded, didn't look surprised. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I need to figure it out somewhere else." "Okay, doors always open if you change your mind." Ray left Kansas in March 1946, drove to Washington, D.C. Didn't have a plan, just knew he needed to be somewhere that understood what he'd been part of. He found work at the War Department civilian analyst in the Strategic Studies Division. They were writing the official history of the war, documenting tactics, analyzing what worked and what didn't. Someone recognized Ray's name from the Noville Report, pulled him into a project studying tank destroyer effectiveness, asked him to review engagement data from the entire European theater. Ray spent 6 months buried in numbers, thousands of after-action reports, hundreds of tank battles. Every engagement analyzed for target selection, timing, positioning, outcome. The patterns were clear. Crews trained in asymmetric targeting had 3 times the kill ratio of untrained crews. They suffered fewer casualties. They disabled more vehicles per round expended. Ray's 3 shots at Noville had been refined into doctrine. That doctrine had been taught to 4,000 crews. Those crews had destroyed an estimated 12,000 German vehicles, saved an estimated 30,000 American lives. The mathematics were precise. The weight was crushing. In September 1946, Ray received a letter. No return address. German postmark. He opened it carefully. "Lieutenant Thompson, my name is Klaus Weber. I was a Panzer Grenadier in 116th Panzer Division. On December 16, 1944, I was riding in the 6th vehicle of a column moving through the Ardennes toward Noville. You destroyed that vehicle. I survived. 12 of my comrades did not. I am writing because I have been reading American accounts of the battle. They call what you did brilliant. They say you saved many lives. They are teaching your tactics in military schools. I am writing to tell you that from where I stood, from where I lay in the snow with my uniform on fire, it did not feel brilliant. It felt like terror. It felt like watching my friends burn. But I am also writing to say, thank you. Yes, thank you. Because your attack stopped our column. And because our column stopped, the offensive failed. And because the offensive failed, the war ended sooner. And because the war ended sooner, my younger brother, who was scheduled to be conscripted in January 1945, never had to fight. He is alive today because the war ended when it did. So I lost 12 friends in December 1944. But I gained a brother who lived. The mathematics are complicated. The emotions are more complicated. I do not know if you think about us. The men you killed. I suspect you do. Soldiers, remember. So I am writing to tell you that we were real. We had families. We had hopes. Most of us did not want to be there. We were following orders, just like you. But I am also writing to tell you that you made the right choice. I have spent 2 years thinking about it. If I had been in your position, if I had seen our column moving toward American soldiers who could not defend themselves, I hope I would have had your courage to fire. War makes enemies of strangers. Peace allows us to see each other as human again. I hope you find peace, Lieutenant Thompson. You earned it. Klaus Weber. Ray read the letter 5 times. Then he put it in his desk drawer next to Decker's letter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 perspectives on the same 90 seconds. Both true. Both real. He pulled out his notebook. Started writing. Klaus Weber lost 12 friends because of me. But his brother lived. Decker's 83 men lived. Hayes's son died, but thousands of others survived because supplies got through. The mathematics balance. 7 deaths for 83 lives. 12 deaths for thousands saved. 200,000 deaths for 1 million saved. But mathematics don't explain what it feels like to be Klaus Weber watching his friends burn. Don't explain what it feels like to be me knowing I lit that fire. Webb told me to turn pain into purpose. I've tried. I taught 4,000 crews. They killed 12,000 enemy vehicles, saved 30,000 American lives. But they also killed how many Klaus Webers? How many brothers and sons and fathers who were just following orders? I don't know how to balance that equation. Don't know if it can be balanced. He closed the notebook. Sat at his desk until morning. In October 1946, Ray received another visitor. James Decker, the lieutenant from Noville. He'd been discharged, was driving cross-country back to Oregon, stopped in Washington to find Ray. They met at a diner near the Capitol. Decker was thinner than his photo suggested. Tired eyes. The look every veteran had, the one that said they'd seen too much. I wanted to meet you in person, Decker said. Thank you for what you did. I read your letter. You said you tell the story. What story do you tell? Decker stirred his coffee. The true one. About a gunner who made a choice. Saved 83 men. We don't embellish it. Don't make you a hero. Just tell it straight. What if I don't want to be remembered? Too late. You changed history. That gets remembered whether you want it or not. Ray thought about that. About Klaus Weber's letter. About 12 Germans who weren't remembered in American stories. When you tell the story, do you mention the Germans I killed? Decker paused. No. Why not? Because we're telling it from our perspective, from the men you saved. That's not the whole story. No, it's not, but it's our story. Ray leaned forward. Listen to me. When you tell it, when anyone tells it, I want you to mention them. The 7 Germans in those tanks. They were real. They had families. They were following orders just like I was. If you're going to remember what I did, remember all of it. Decker was quiet for a long time. That's not how war stories usually work. I don't care how they usually work. I care about the truth. And the truth is, I killed 7 men to save 83. Both parts matter. Both parts are real. Decker nodded slowly. Okay. I'll tell it that way. They finished their coffee. Shook hands. Decker drove west. Ray went back to his office. In December 1946, Ray was invited to speak at the Army War College. They wanted him to present on asymmetric engagement theory. He prepared for 2 weeks. Charts, diagrams, case studies. The auditorium was full. Colonels, generals, strategists. Ray stood at the podium looking at them all. He started with the standard presentation, the tactical principles, the target selection methodology, the mathematics of cascade failure. Then he deviated from his notes. What I haven't talked about is cost. Not material cost, human cost. Every time you execute asymmetric targeting, you're making a choice. You're deciding that killing these people is worth saving those people. The mathematics usually support that choice. 7 for 83. 12 for thousands. But mathematics don't explain what it feels like. The room was silent. I received a letter last month from a German soldier whose vehicle I destroyed. He lost 12 friends, but his brother lived because the war ended sooner. He thanked me. Can you understand that? He thanked me for killing his friends because it led to his brother surviving. Ray paused. That's the weight of command. That's what you're signing up for when you use these tactics. You're not just destroying vehicles. You're ending lives. And you better be certain, absolutely certain, that the lives you save are worth the lives you take. A general in the front row raised his hand. Lieutenant Thompson, are you saying we shouldn't use these tactics? No, sir. I'm saying we should understand what we're doing when we use them. We should remember both sides of the equation. We should carry the weight honestly instead of hiding behind mathematics. After the presentation, several officers approached him. Some agreed. Some thought he was being too philosophical. One colonel said, "War isn't philosophy, Lieutenant, it's survival." Ray responded, "Sir, if we don't philosophize about war, we forget why we're fighting. And if we forget why we're fighting, we become the thing we're fighting against." In 1947, Ray left the War Department, went back to school, used the GI Bill to study mathematics at Georgetown. He was 24 years old, sitting in classrooms with 18-year-olds who'd never seen combat. They asked him questions sometimes. Did you really fight in the war? Yes. Did you kill anyone? Yes. What was it like? I don't talk about it, but he did talk about it. In his thesis. Applied Pattern Recognition in Complex Systems. It wasn't about war. It was entirely about war. He wrote about cascade failures, about how attacking the right node could collapse an entire structure, about how understanding patterns was the difference between survival and death. His advisor read it, called him into his office. "Thompson, this is brilliant, but it's also terrifying. You're describing a methodology for efficient killing." "I'm describing a methodology for efficient problem solving. The fact that I learned it in combat doesn't make it invalid." "No, but it makes it dangerous, because mathematics without ethics becomes atrocity." Ray thought about Hiroshima. I know. He graduated in 1949, doctorate in applied mathematics, got offers from defense contractors, turned them all down, took a teaching position at a small college in Vermont instead. He taught for 30 years. Pattern recognition, systems analysis, applied mathematics. He never mentioned his war service unless students asked directly. When they asked, he'd say, "I learned these principles in Europe. They apply to everything. Engineering, economics, medicine, warfare. The patterns are universal." In 1974, a historian contacted him, writing a book about the Battle of the Bulge. Wanted to interview Ray about Noville. They met at Ray's house. The historian, young woman, mid-20s doctorate from Yale, had done her research. She knew the tactical details, knew the casualty figures, knew the doctrine that had emerged from Ray's action. "Mr. Thompson, do you consider yourself a hero?" "No." "Why not? You saved 83 men." "I killed 7. Heroes don't keep count. I've been counting for 30 years. "Do you regret what you did?" Ray thought about that. About Decker's letter. About Klaus Weber's letter. About 30 years of teaching students to see patterns and solve problems. "No, but I regret that it was necessary. There's a difference." What do you want people to remember about what you did? All of it. Not just that I saved 83 men, that I killed 7. Not just that the tactics worked, that they worked because I was willing to carry the weight of the choice. I want people to understand that every decision in war, every trigger pull, every order given has human cost. And mathematics might justify the cost, but mathematics don't make it disappear. The historian published her book in 1975. Ray was a chapter. The gunner who changed doctrine. She'd included everything. Decker's perspective, Klaus Weber's letter, the 30,000 lives saved, the 12,000 enemies killed. Both sides of the equation. Ray read it once, put it on his shelf, never opened it again. In 1984, Ray attended a reunion. Tank destroyer veterans, Fort Hood, Texas, 40 years after the Ardennes. Eddie was there. They hadn't seen each other in 20 years. They sat together at the banquet. Gray-haired now, Eddie still in Brooklyn, Ray still teaching. They talked about their families, their jobs, everything except the war. Finally, Eddie said, "Ray, do you ever think about it that day? Every day?" "Me too. I wonder sometimes, what if you'd been wrong? What if those tanks weren't going to Noville? Then I'd have been wrong, but I wasn't." "How do you know?" "Because I've spent 40 years studying patterns, analyzing systems, teaching students to see what others miss. And every time I look at that day, every time I reconstruct the decision, I come to the same conclusion. It was the right call." "Does that make it easier?" "No. It just makes it true." They sat in silence. Around them, other veterans told stories, laughed, remembered battles. Ray and Eddie just sat. Finally, Eddie said, "You know what I tell my grandkids when they ask about the war?" "What?" "I tell them their grandfather loaded the rounds that saved 83 men, that I was part of something that mattered. And I tell them that we did it because someone made a hard choice, and that making hard choices is what matters in life." Ray nodded. "That's good. That's true." "You want to know what I don't tell them?" "What?" "That I still dream about it. The sound of the gun, the smell of the smoke, the way you looked after like you'd aged 10 years in 90 seconds. I don't tell them that part because I don't know how to explain it." "Eddie, that's the part they need to hear." "Why?" "Because that's the cost. That's what war actually is. Not glory, not heroism, just weight. And if we don't tell them about the weight, they'll think war is just mathematics, just tactics, just equations that balance. They need to know it never balances. Not really." Eddie was quiet. Then, "You should write that down." "I have. Nobody wants to read it." "They will eventually. History always catches up." Ray went home from the reunion, pulled out his old field notebook, the one he'd carried in the Ardennes. Pages yellowed now, ink fading, but the words still clear. December 16th, 1944. "Today I killed men to save men." The math says I made the right choice, but math doesn't explain the weight. He'd written that 40 years ago. It was still true. Ray died in 1998, 75 years old. Heart attack. Quick and clean. His daughter found his papers, the field notebook, the letters from Decker and Weber, the thesis, the historian's book. She published them. The complete papers of Raymond Thompson Pattern Recognition and the Ethics of Choice. Academic press. Small circulation. Mostly read by military historians and ethics professors. But the book found its way into military academies, into officer training courses, into discussions about when to follow orders and when to break them, into debates about mathematics and morality. And slowly, over years, Ray's 3 shots at Noville became more than just tactical doctrine. They became a case study in the ethics of command, in the weight of decision-making, in the difference between doing what's ordered and doing what's right. Every officer who graduates from the Army War College now studies Ray's engagement. Not just the tactics, the whole story. Decker's letter, Weber's letter, Ray's 40 years of carrying the weight. They learn asymmetric targeting, but they also learn that every time you pull a trigger, someone's son dies. Every time you give an order, someone carries the consequence. Every time you make a choice, the weight increases. And they learn that mathematics might justify the choice, but mathematics don't make it lighter. Ray Thompson fired 3 shots in 90 seconds. Those 3 shots saved thousands of lives, killed 7 men, changed military doctrine, and taught generations of officers that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and acting anyway. About making the hard choice and carrying the weight honestly. About understanding that war isn't mathematics, it's humanity under pressure. And the measure of a soldier isn't how many enemies they kill, but how clearly they see both sides of every decision they make. He built nothing with hatred. He saved lives with calculation. And he spent 50 years teaching others that the space between those two things, between tactical necessity and human cost, is where character lives. Where honor lives. Where the difference between a soldier and a killer becomes clear. If you believe his story matters, if you believe that understanding the weight of command matters, then share this. Write a name in the comments. Remember someone who made a hard choice, because that's how we honor the dead. Not by forgetting the cost, but by remembering it so clearly that we think twice before paying it again.